This week I have mostly been reading about Nero, the notorious Nero. Notorious! Like my last video on Caligula, I thought I'd just read the most funny and mental and naughty bits from Suetonius's account of the life of Nero. And I am aware that some of it may well be exaggerated or even made up, but nevertheless these are the words that Suetonius wrote, probably sometime around 120 AD, so probably only about 60 odd years after Nero lived, and it is sort of crazy right off the bat. It is sort of kind of unbelievable, but anyway, here's what he wrote. Quote, "His insolence, lust, extravagance, greed and cruelty he at first revealed only gradually and secretly, to be sure, as though merely youthful mistakes, but even then there could be no doubt that these were the faults of his character, not of his age. As soon as night fell, he would snatch a hat or cap and make a round of the taverns or prowl the streets in search of mischief, not always innocent mischief either, because one of his games was to attack men on their way home from dinner, stab them if they offered resistance, and then drop their bodies down the sewers. He would also break into shops, afterwards opening a miniature market in his home with the stolen goods, dividing them up into lots, auctioning them himself, and squandering the proceeds. During these escapades he often risked being blinded or killed. Once he was beaten almost to death by a senator whose wife he had molested, which taught him never to go out after dark unless an escort of military tribunes was following him at a discreet distance." End quote. So that is crazy, right? Abducting people off the street. I mean, what the hell? It's ridiculous. I'll just rattle off a few. Quote, "Gradually Nero's vices gained the upper hand, but he no longer tried to laugh them off or hide them or deny them, but turned quite brazen. Whenever he floated down the Tiber to Ostia or cruised past Baiae, he had a row of temporary brothels erected along the shore, where a number of noble women, pretending to be madams, stood waiting to solicit his business. Not satisfied with seducing freeborn boys and married women, Nero raped the Vestal Virgin Rubria. He nearly contrived to marry the freedwoman Acte, by persuading some friends of consular rank to swear falsely that she came from royal stock. Having tried to turn the boy Sporus into a girl by castration, he went through a wedding ceremony with him, dowry, bridal veil and all, which the whole court attended, then brought him home and treated him as a wife. A rather amusing joke is still going the rounds. The world would have been a happier place had Nero's father, Domitius, married that sort of wife. He dressed Sporus in the fine clothes normally worn by an empress." End quote. So he's some sort of weird and twisted character, there's no doubt. Even if the accounts are exaggerated or some of it is made up, it seems clear that the character shining through to us is a depraved one. There's just no doubt about that. I mean, let's quote, "The passion he felt for his mother, Agrippina, was notorious, but her enemies would not let him consummate it, fearing that if he did, she would become even more powerful and ruthless than hitherto. So he found a new mistress who was said to be her exact image. Some say that he did in fact commit incest with Agrippina every time they rode in the same litter. The state of his clothes when he emerged proved it."
With all due respect, what the fuck are you talking about?
Nero was as prodigal with his own chastity as with that of others, and after befouling every part of his body, he at last invented a novel game. He was released from a den, dressed in the skins of wild animals, and attacked the private parts of men and women who stood bound at stakes. After working up sufficient excitement by this means, he was finished off, shall we say, by his freedman Doryphorus. Doryphorus now married him, just as he himself had married Sporus, and on the wedding night he imitated the screams and moans of a girl being deflowered. End quote. I mean, what the really? Really? Killing your own mum is pretty bad, isn't it? And, Nero did that, and here's the passages in Suetonius. Quote, "The over-watchful, over-critical eye that Agrippina kept on whatever Nero said or did proved more than he could stand. He first tried to embarrass her by frequent threats to abdicate and go into retirement in Rhodes. Then, having deprived her of all honour and power, and even of her Roman and German bodyguard, he expelled her from the Palatine, after which he did everything possible to annoy her, sending people to pester her with lawsuits while she stayed in Rome, and when she took refuge on her country estates, making them constantly drive or sail past the windows, disturbing her with jeers and catcalls. In the end, her threats and violent behaviour terrified him into deciding that she must die. He tried to poison her 3 times, but she had always taken the antidote in advance, so he rigged up a machine in the ceiling of her bedroom which would dislodge the panels and drop them on her while she slept. However, someone gave the secret away. Then he had a collapsible cabin boat designed, which would either sink or fall in on top of her. Under pretense of a reconciliation, he sent the most friendly note inviting her to celebrate the Quincartus with him at Baiae, and on her arrival he made one of his captains stage an accidental collision with the galley in which she had sailed. Then he protracted the feast until a late hour, and when at last she said, "I really must get back to Bully," he offered her his collapsible boat instead of the damaged galley. Nero was in a very happy mood as he led Agrippina down to the quay, and even kissed her breasts before she stepped aboard. He sat up all night on tenterhooks of anxiety, waiting for news of her death. At dawn, Lucius Agamus, her freedman, entered joyfully to report that, although the ship had foundered, his mother had swum to safety, and that he need have no fears on her account. For want of a better plan, Nero ordered one of his men to drop a dagger surreptitiously beside Agamus, whom he arrested at once on a charge of attempted murder. After this, he arranged for Agrippina to be killed, and made it seem as if she had sent Agamus to assassinate him, but committed suicide on hearing the plot had miscarried. Other more gruesome details are supplied by reliable authorities. It appears that Nero rushed off to examine Agrippina's corpse, handling her legs and arms critically, and between drinks discussing her good and bad points. Though encouraged by the congratulations which poured in from the army and the Senate and people, he was never thereafter able to free his conscience from the guilt of this crime." End quote. After Octavia, he took 2 more wives. First, Poppaea Sabina, a quaestor's daughter, and at that time married to an eques, and then Statilia Messalina, great-great-granddaughter of Augustus's general Statilius Turrus, who had twice been consul and won a triumph. To marry Statilia, he was obliged to murder her husband, the consul Atticus Festicus. Life with Octavia had soon bored him, and when his friends criticised his treatment of her, he retorted, "The title of wife ought surely to be enough for her." He tried to strangle her on several occasions, but finally announced that she was barren and divorced her. This act made him so unpopular and caused so great a scandal that he banished Octavia and finally had her executed on a charge of adultery. Her innocence was proved by the refusal of the witnesses to testify against her, even under torture, so he bribed his old tutor Anicestus to confess, falsely, that he had tricked her into infidelity. Though he doted on Poppaea, whom he married 12 days after his divorce from Octavia, he kicked her to death while she was pregnant and feeling very ill, because she dared complain that he came home late from the races. End quote.
Why the fuck?
There was no family relationship which Nero did not criminally abuse. When Claudius's daughter Antonia refused to take Poppaea's place, he had her executed on a charge of attempted rebellion. He likewise destroyed every other member of his family, including several relatives by marriage. Among them was young Aulus Plautius, whom he raped before having him put to death, remarking, "Now mother may come and kiss my successor." He claimed that Agrippina had been in love with Aulus and had induced him to make a bid for the throne. There was also his stepson, Rufius Crispinus, Poppaea's child by her former husband. Nero had the boy's own slaves drown him on a fishing expedition simply because he was said to have played at being a general and an emperor. When his teacher Seneca repeatedly asked leave to retire and had surrendered all his estates, Nero swore that he had no cause to suspect the old man, whom he would rather die than harm, but he drove him to commit suicide nonetheless. Nero was no less cruel to strangers than to members of his family. A comet, popularly supposed to herald the death of some person of outstanding importance, appeared several nights running and greatly disturbed him. His astrologer, Baubilus, observed that monarchs usually avoided portents of this kind by executing their most prominent subjects, and thus directing the wrath of heaven elsewhere. So Nero resolved on a wholesale massacre of the nobility. After this, nothing could restrain Nero from murdering anyone he pleased on whatever context. Those whom he ordered to commit suicide were never given more than an hour's grace. To ensure against delays, he made doctors take care of any who were found still alive, which in Nero's vocabulary meant opening their veins. He was eager, it is said, to get hold of a certain Egyptian, a sort of ogre who would eat raw flesh and practically anything else he was given, and watch him tear live men to pieces and then devour them. These successes, as Nero called them, went to his head, and he boasted that no previous ruler had ever realised the extent of his power. Often he hinted broadly that it was not his intention to spare the remaining senators, but would one day wipe out the entire senatorial order and let equites and freedmen govern the provinces and command the armies instead." End quote. So again, that sort of thing just can't last for too long. In the end, you're going to make too many enemies, and you're going to come to a sticky end, which of course is what happened to Nero. So after multiple generals decided to finally revolt against him and were all marching towards Rome, the Senate itself declares Nero an enemy of the people, and he's forced into his final moments. And this is what Suetonius writes, quote, "At last, after nearly 14 years of Nero's misrule, the earth rid himself of him. A runner brought a letter to Phaon. Nero tore it from the man's hands and read that, having been declared a public enemy by the Senate, he would be punished in ancient style when arrested. He asked what ancient style meant, and learnt that the executioners stripped their victim naked, thrust his head into a wooden fork, and then flogged him to death with sticks. In terror he snatched up the 2 daggers which he had brought along and tried their points, but threw them down again, protesting that the fatal hour had not yet come. Then he begged Sporus to weep and mourn for him, and also begged one of them to set him an example by committing suicide first. He kept moaning about his cowardice, and muttering, 'How ugly and vulgar my life has become. This is certainly not fitting for Nero, not fitting at all. I have to keep my nerve in all this. Come, pull yourself together.' By this time the troop of cavalry who had orders to take him alive were coming up the road. Nero gasped, 'Hark to the sound I hear. It is hooves of galloping horses.' Then, with the help of his secretary, Epaphrodius, he stabbed himself in the throat and was already half dead when a cavalry officer entered, pretending to have rushed to his rescue and staunching the wound with his cloak. Nero muttered, 'Too late, but what fidelity.' So speaking he died, with eyes glazed and bulging from their sockets, a sight which horrified everybody present." End quote.